All right, so you got a blank canvas, bone stock G20 330i with the B46D engine. You saw my series about how I made over 500 crank horsepower reliably. You've seen that it ran for about a year or 10,000 miles without issue, and you're thinking you want to replicate my build, but you'd like for me to spell out everything, assuming you're starting from stock. You want to know how much it's going to cost, where you'd get the components, and how you would do it. I'm covering that in today's video. And as you can see, because the engine's out of the car and it's put back to stock, I can show you every last component on the bench as well. So the first piece of the puzzle is going to be an upgraded turbo. This is an aftermarket turbo from a company called IPOS, or In Pursuit of Speed Motorsports. They call it the IM450. It's not a hybrid. It's not based off of the stock turbo. It's its own turbo. So it's kind of like a full frame, but in stock format. It has dual ceramic ball bearings, a spool like stock or nearly like stock. And this one is being optioned with compressor holes for a little bit more sound. It comes with an aftermarket inlet, and then to delete the factory resonator and get less restriction, I went with this elbow. But this is definitely your starting point. You'll need to pair that with a downpipe. I got this from IPOS as well. Next up, it's not optional. It has to be purchased to work with the setup I had. It's going to be an aftermarket charge pipe, but of course that does deal with improving reliability as well because it's made out of metal. Next up is going to be a port injection plate, and you'll need the port injectors to go in there. These are 550cc. You're going to need a port injection controller, and then you'll need a fuel line to feed it. Then you have the optional ethanol sensor to have flex fuel and on-the-fly adjustment based on the amount of ethanol you're running. And then you can monitor the pressure to turn off the injectors if the pressure drops too low because your low pressure fuel pump is no longer supplying enough fuel. This is an option, but I had that. This is a power harness to feed power to the motive. And there's a special harness to go to the flex fuel sensor. And then there's a harness that feeds the injectors and works with this motive reflex. I used Ecutech and I used Racebox as my tuner. You'll need this dongle, you'll need this cable and this license key, which you would purchase from the tuner Racebox. If you have a pre-June 2020 DME and your car was made before June 2020, you can check the date right on the DME. You'll be able to bench unlock this and you'll be able to load Ecutech right on there, and then the Ecutech will control the reflex. The tune for the port injectors will come right from the DME, so you have native control. That's one of the advantages of Ecutech, at least for the B48. It's the only way to get that. If you have a post-June 2020 DME up until model year 24, then you would have to send your DME to Femto in Finland to get it read, and then you'd have to get your files off of it and have those cloned over to a pre-June 2020 DME, and then they would be ready to do what I just described. So there could be a cost associated to shipping your DME to Femto, paying them for the service of pulling the bin files off of it, and then sending the files to you so you can take it to a local place that could do the clone for you, so you'll be ready to be able to use Ecutech. Now, another major piece of the puzzle for me was this upgraded intake manifold from IPOS. With that turbo, I was pushing it to get the most out of it, and at high RPMs with this intake manifold, I didn't feel any fading in power, and I could do back-to-back pulls and never have any power degradation. It was really designed to eat up all the heat that would be coming out of that turbo at any RPM from my experience. It's because it takes a lot more liquid volume because of the bigger intake manifold, a bigger surface area, and just a lot better cooling. So this is what makes it where you can get stock like spool, but you can pull right to redline. You can do back-to-back pulls and not worry about losing power. This kind of ties everything together, in my opinion. It comes with this phenolic spacer for heat rejection between the intake manifold and the head. All right, so 2750 with the installation kit and the compressor hole mod that I have. I'll be putting a link in the description for all the components I'm showing you today. Then we have the intake manifold with the optional powder coating, another 2750. Then we have downpipe with gasket. Then we have the port injection plate with injectors. Then we have the motive reflex injection harness. We have the power harness, we have the adapter to tee in for your pressure sensor, we have a USB cable to communicate to your computer, we have the pressure sensor, the plug and play ethanol sensor, tap kit, ethanol content sensor, and the reflex itself, 1258. We have the charge pipe, plus we have a heat exchanger, and we have the full tune, plus the interface kit, the license key, the flash license, and the add-on to do Bluetooth pairing to your phone. This is for hybrid, but ultimately, because it's using the stock wastegate, it's classified as hybrid. So that's 2420. So that's what it totals before taxes and delivery. to replicate what I had done on my car, making a solid like 470, 480 wheel horsepower back to back, around 520 wheel torque continuous. So coming up, I'm going to tell you if I think that is excessive and if it's worth it relative to the amount of power and performance you get reliably. You don't necessarily have to take it this far depending on your power goals. If you just try to keep things simple, you don't care about the compressor hole mod, you just want the install kit and a Gen 2 turbo, if you just put this on your car, you definitely wouldn't need this if you're not pushing the type of power I was pushing. I would say you pretty much need that, otherwise you're going to have a big bottleneck with the upgraded turbo. You might as well keep your stock turbo and try to get a tune on that to make 300, maybe 320 wheel if you're lucky. But this is a must, plus this. So this is E85 ethanol. I was running full E85 on my car. Just as an FYI, the stock fuel pump on the car can handle up to 600 wheel, and you can run full E85 at the type of power levels I was going for. But you have to supplement with port. So if you want to push the same type of power but you don't have E85 locally in your country, then you'd probably be skipping this anyway. Maybe you would be going with the intake manifold so you can do meth bungs to make similar power. You wouldn't need any of this if you're okay with no more than like 420 wheel. You could lower the cost of the tune, so you could potentially talk to the tuner about not running any PI and just going for less power on the upgraded turbo. Charge pipe's a good idea, but you could even leave this off. It was required in my case because I needed to account for the spacing of the port injection plate. This would be optional as well. The heat exchanger, depending on your power goals, you could leave this off. So maybe 2650 for the turbo, 320 for your downpipe, plus maybe 1500 for the tune. So the reason I jumped straight to a turbo upgrade on my car is because the stock turbo doesn't really like to make more than 300 wheel horsepower. If you were to run this turbo on just 91, you'd probably make 360 wheel horsepower, just a turbo and the downpipe. If you're in a state that has 93 octane, potentially 380 wheel horsepower, no ethanol. And I can see a situation where you run E50 in your tank and you don't have any port injection, to where you could probably start getting close to 420, 430 wheel horsepower on full 85. And if you're just running this at 360 to 380 wheel horsepower, you're probably not going to overwhelm the cooling and require this, where you'd be saturating the heat exchanger. So you'd have to ask yourself, to go from maybe 420 wheel horsepower to 480 wheel horsepower on this IM 450, does it make sense to spend the money on the port plate, to spend the money on the reflex and the additional tuning cost? Is that worth it? You'd have to decide. That's what it takes to get the G80 levels of performance. But I did it reliably, so it's worth it because you have the underpinnings to make it viable. I didn't have this at first. I still made 520 wheel torque without this. It's just after 3 runs on the street, you'd feel the car slow down. Because I was pushing this turbo outside of its efficiency range, but I also wanted it to spool like stock for the best daily driving performance possible. There's a following turbo which is more expensive, $3,000, IM 500, where it's going to be efficient at high RPMs. It may not overwhelm the cooling system as quickly, but this spools later. So it would be all about performance and less about daily driving with this. In my eyes, it made sense to go for the best spool possible with dual ceramic ball bearings and a smaller turbo, but also push it outside of its efficiency range, which would mean that once you get to really high RPMs, it's starting to make higher IATs, which was compensated for primarily with this. So could you start off spending under 5K and making 380 wheel without ethanol? And maybe if you really want to try and be bold, maybe $6,000 and have well over 400 wheel horsepower? Yes. I went for Torque Monster. I went for a little quicker than a G80. I went for high 8s, 60 to 130 times, and it was really fast. But now let's try to justify the 11K. This thing really was a missile at high speeds, and 60 to 130 in the 8s, faster than a G80, and even if you took an M340i and tried to max out its stock turbo, it probably wouldn't be able to hang with this car because this thing would keep power to a red line with that intake manifold. It truly was like legit power. A low 11-second car felt like a 10-second car from a roll almost. So if that sounds like a lot of money to you, I can understand it. And would you want to throw that much money into a car relative to its purchase price? Potentially not. But if you think about the fact that once you've done so, you've spent less than 35K potentially if you get the right car, and you're hanging with Hellcats on the highway, and you can do it back to back because of the fact that this car is ultimately a 4-door Supra or an M340i missing 2 cylinders, and literally everything else is the same. So the fundamentals are just so overbuilt besides the engine itself. But turns out that even the engine is overbuilt. It's just not delivering the power from the factory in stock form. But when you factor in the amount of potential left on the table from the engine because it shares the same internals as the B48, and the fact that you can beat on it day after day making over 500 crank, it's a lot of drama, it's a lot of theater, it's a lot of speed if you enjoy being in sport mode all the time and you don't really care about driving comfort, you just want to be on the edge at all times. Buy a G20 for low 20s, well equipped, and then throw these bolt-ons on. You have a very fast car, a little bit quicker than a G80, and there's still some room on the table if you want to push things a little bit further. A bit of backstory, I bought this car as a great daily driver. I wasn't so worried about having speed with this particular car. I just wanted the features in assisted driving, and I figured we could maybe throw a tune on it one day. And then I went down the rabbit hole of researching what is available for this car. Did the research and found that it has the same internals as a M340i, and we all know those M340i's can make crazy power. So I said, you know what, I have to do this, and I put a video up saying I found the best kept secret in BMW engines, the fact that this would make over 500 crank horsepower, which I've demonstrated and shown it can last, and inspired a lot of you people, I think. So knowing all that, I started researching beyond the internals of the engine to see if the drive line, brakes, drive shafts, and everything else on this particular car was going to be able to handle the power. And I saw that, you know what, at least for this car in particular with the M Sport differential and upgraded brakes from the factory, it literally is an M340i. They sent it down the assembly line with the same pistons, rods, same transmission, same brakes, LSD and everything. It was just literally missing the 2 cylinders up at the front, and it had a different steering rack. So I just felt compelled to do a swap because of the fact that I saw that it was possible. It was just too easily done that I felt like I wanted to do it as a personal challenge, and also to make more of a catered daily for the way I like to drive, something punchy right off the line. And I'm not so concerned with super fast speed given I'm getting a little bit older. But really, I went down the rabbit hole to find out that this engine has crazy potential. And then in doing so, I went down the rabbit hole of realizing that this is so similar to the M340i that you could just toss a B48 in it and go on your way. Speaking of which, let me pop the hood. To my regular viewers, you guys were anticipating this, but for someone that's new to my channel, this is a B58 Gen 2, and it is not the motor that normally comes in an M340i, but as you can see, it looks OEM, and it looks like it came that way from the factory. To the keen eye, you'll notice that that's a 2-port. This is a high compression variant that makes more torque, and it's geared toward more punch right off the line. So rather than keep you guys waiting for the whole build series to hear how this thing sounds, I will do a cold start and take you for a little drive to show you what it feels like. Right now it's on a stock tune, but a lot more to come on this swap. into it just with like 10-15% throttle in comfort mode, but if you stay under about 10%, it's really quiet. In sport mode, very bassy. Back to comfort. There's no backfires. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that little drive, and to hear how aggressive that B48 sounds, it's definitely a ton of fun. But speaking of engines, this particular engine is back in stock form, and it's of course super well maintained. Just because I pushed it doesn't mean I didn't maintain it meticulously. Just to show you how clean things are, this thing has 51,000 miles and it's perfectly clean. It's pure silver inside. Now, putting it out there, everything besides the front heat exchanger and the tune itself is available to be purchased used at a significant discount. Check the description. Everything is listed on eBay. You could buy it as a huge package, or you could buy it individually if you want to replicate my build at a discount. Including the motor itself, this could be useful for a swap if you want something vetted and known to be good, and or if you have a 330i and you're thinking to kind of push things, you can swap this motor into your 330i, and then you have the potential to make the same type of power I had, plus have all the electric assist, because some versions of the 330i came with this motor, but by the time they came with this, I believe they had locked DMEs. So if you were to get an early one with an unlocked DME and then swap this motor in, you could do something revolutionary potentially. I think it's only been done now. I just heard about it where someone had the 320i engine on an early car and they made like 700 something horsepower because they had the electric assist. I'm sure they would have loved to have done it with a later 330i that naturally comes from the factory with this motor, but I don't think there's any options in terms of getting the DME unlocked or cloning or any of that. So you really truly would need an early 330i, and then you put this motor into it to make something monstrous. So if you want to help me out and you were looking to replicate my build anyway, check the description. You'll get a good savings off of the retail price. They're as good as new. I guarantee that they're pretty much in new condition. They have about 10,000 miles on them, but meticulously maintained. Zero wear on the turbo. You can't tell that this stuff isn't new pretty much. Now, some of you may be disappointed to see that I abandoned the platform, but keep in mind that ultimately I went down the rabbit hole to realize what it was capable of, which led down to the rabbit hole of the fact that these can be swapped easily. So it's kind of like I had to, but I would love to revisit this. If money was no object, I would grab a 330i right away and slap this into it and make a monster package, and then make it where it's making 7-something wheel reliably with a stronger transmission and everything. That would be amazing, but that's not feasible for me right now. Maybe one of you guys could do that. But if I was going to do it on a 330i, you probably want to do it with the IM 500 turbo. Something that makes more power at higher RPMs and takes longer to spool because you have that torque feel anyway. So if you guys want to replicate my build, check the description. If you have questions about how I got there and you want any clarifications, leave the comments in the comment section. Thanks for watching.